Afternoon. I'm making sure everything is set up. Hello, hello. Um, I had to disconnect for a while. It's very hard for me to stay connected. I grew up very isolated. After like 5 years old, I was isolated for like 5, 10 years in the mountains. And so I'm very isolated as a human. And it's very hard for me to deal with massive information, and especially information that's not pertinent to what I'm trying to do, right? Like outside information that's a cacophony in of what I people wanting me to do things while I'm trying to focus on other things. And then I have like this real life that also has people in it. And sometimes it has people in it that I don't know very well. They're newer people in my life. And so that can be a little bit of that cacophony of stuff as well. And so I get to a point where I have to disconnect from all of it to be able to handle anything. And so I know that I'm random, and I understand that. Um, I can't be anything else, and I don't want any other. I better actually put that way because otherwise it does look like I'm not wearing anything. I can't be anything else, and my body and my mind have no desire to be anything else. To the point that trying to be anything else becomes hard work for me, and I'm not willing to make anything in my life hard work anymore. I don't work for others, and I don't work for. I can't. I can't make anything in my life hard work anymore. Um, I've done too much of that, and so I disconnect, and am very random. So um, I was just going to go over random things today and talk about random things only because I know that I need to get in here and I need people to I need to actually be cognizant in here to maintain connection in here, right? And so I I know I need to come in and I know I need to do things. Um, I know that there's a lot of things to deal with and a lot of things that are um, very important and very valid things. They're not the lanes that I'm in, and they're not the places that I am trying to deal. And so I'm not going to deal with them very much. And the reason that I'm not going to deal with them very much is because it's very hard for me to deal in TikTok. I don't scroll. I don't go through and see everybody's stuff, unfortunately. If I'm sent a lot of videos, I can't even wade through a lot of videos either. And so reading comments in sections on 3 or 4 different videos will confuse me. I can't track it. And so it's very hard for me to deal with any of that, anyways. My intentions have never, ever been on any level the intentions of somebody who is trying to get one over on anybody or to make anything out of this. I mean, of course, I appreciate financial support like we all do in a time of late stage capitalism that's fucked up, right? But it's not for the money, it's for um, my belief in what I think is going on and my belief in who we are in humanity. Because I believe that it might make you see ways that you can identify ways out of this, right? If you can see it full on, then you know what you're doing to get out of it because we're all fucking intelligent human beings, right? Um, so it's always positive, and I don't like getting involved in people's back and forth and brawls, and especially if I don't know what the fuck's going on because I can't wade through this shit, and I'm not going to. It's just not who I'm here for. It's not what I'm here to do. Of course, it's all important, and I'm not devaluing any of it, but I can't be in people's arguments, right? Just because I can't understand the war, A, right? Like, B, we're trying, I am trying so hard to show that community without fighting each other is absolutely possible with who we are as humanity. And it is only by noticing the divisions that are created within us that we see that it is society and late stage capitalism and like structure and this stratification where it's not always work that's going on that's causing so many of those problems, right? So I very much don't want to get involved in any of those things. So if I'm not answering those things and I'm not dealing with those things, I apologize this much, only in the fact that I understand why you would expect me to want to get involved. And I do want to get involved. I just don't have the bandwidth. So, with all that stated, I wanted to come in and go ahead and go over some of the things that are really basic to my understanding of humanity through degrees, through study over years. And not all my sources are sources I can even come up with because some of this shit is 20, 30, 40 years ago. Some of this shit is before some of this is what I learned to read on, right? Like some of this stuff is so old that it's not that, present of where I found it, just that I know it, right? So let me go over some of the things that I like to talk about. And some of the base things that I like to talk about today. The first one is going to be science and medicine and it's indigenous, and I'm going to answer a couple of the things that I saw in chat. Chat gets bad, I'll tend to turn it off, but only because then I can focus. So thank you to everybody I saw that was very positive about me taking the time off. I really appreciated that so much. And I understand totally and completely that I have many people who understand that are like minds, that are friends. And so I am so grateful of that. There's no such thing as indigenous people. It's a colonial term, only people of the land. So I am speaking in a bastardized language made up of 10 different languages that at minimum, and is not even spoken or pronounced how it's supposed to be spoken or pronounced in its original iteration. And not even a direct descendant of that original iteration because of the fact that English is from England, the nation, right? And so there are even groups that qualify under the term indigenous under the United Nations. It's not United Nations, I believe. It might be one of those other global qualifiers. And there are groups within that nation that actually fall underneath that category. It is a categorization. Categorizations are bullshit on every level. Agreed, 100%. People who belong to the land would be the thing that I would want to say to that. And by that, I mean people who look at the mother or the earth or the biome or the world around them that they get to live in. I'm just doing my nails, so I have this thing. Like really, the earth that they live in, people who unite around that, or not unite around, feel that connection to and live within and are part of, belong to that space, are people who would be termed as indigenous to that space. The term is absolutely colonial. Denny's full name is Denny because Denny is a half Neanderthal, half Denisovan hybrid that was found in the Denisova cave in Russia. And Denny is about 13 years old, and she is female biologically. And we have been able to learn a lot of stuff from her DNA. We're still learning a lot of stuff from her DNA. We've been able to kind of extrapolate what she might look like from a thigh bone, a chunk this big from Denisova Cave. And she gives us a good bit of information. I don't know all the information. It's still such a new study, and I don't have access to all of the stuff, and I haven't been able to totally delve into Denny yet. We are barely sentient primates hurtling through space in a moldy ball of mud, and that's it. I don't think that the ball of mud is moldy. And I would agree that our sentience is rather low comparatively. And we are hurtling through space. I agree 100% with that as well. Though I would say, especially double down with the next comment of what is mold, is that absolutely there's plenty of mold on this planet. There's plenty of like biological functions on this planet that I don't understand near enough to actually go through. But and she is absolutely ancient. The earth, the biome that we live in. And I try to use different terms, more up to date terms, maybe sometimes. And then I try to also, well, I can't get away from using the terms that I grew up understanding, right? So the earth herself, like I feel, is absolutely an ancient ball of mud. And did you see, and I don't know jack shit about this, but did you see how they came across or there was an article that came across through the scientific journals or the sci platforms or stuff like that that they, maybe it was even CNN, that they saw and have found like there's a whole other biome like underneath the ocean floor. Like the ocean floor was leaking upwards, like from the bottom of the ocean floor in the Puget, not Puget, in the Pacific, out in the Pacific, and it's off the coast, the west coast of, God, I can't remember which space here, but the off the west coast of Turtle Island. It is, they're looking and they're seeing that there's deeper layers to the earth than just one moldy ball of mud. Um, okay. So um, I will go over everything on the list, but let's start with science and medicine are indigenous. And why I say science and medicine are indigenous. I'm a paleoanthropologist, archaeologist by trade or by schooling. And I have worked in medicine as well. I have studied this stuff since I was learning to read. It was how I cracked my teeth on books. Um, I have put some thought into this, but I'm taking it to you on a biological, archaeological level. When we look at the biological record or the archaeological record in biology within the archaeological record, we see that as far back as we go with things like fire and things like science is into, God, roughly 2 million years ago with Homo erectus. We see that our first tools, one second, YouTube, if you come, I'll be back. This might destabilize for just a moment. the body, you see that marrow is one of those things that we're trying to get at really early on. Just a second. So that seemed like it was saying resume live. So I'm not sure when it cut out. I'll go back over the last bit that it was stating just to make sure. Paranthropus boisei and Homo habilis are living together according to fossil finds. And because they're together, along with it seems a couple of other possible species, we start to see Homo erectus starting to come onto the scene. This is a newer, it's a theory of evolution that has been out there, yet it's been a theoretical theory of evolution. And we're starting to realize now that this is how Homo erectus really comes onto the scene. Seems to be why Homo erectus is kind of a broad morphological species instead of being a very unique morphological species, and seems to be one of those things that really, let's try it like that. One of those things that really kind of one of those things that kind of moves us forward. When we're looking at theories of evolutions, there's about 5 theories of how things evolve. And one of those theories has been theoretical up until now, and it's the theory of convergence. Within the last 6 months, I've seen released information on the theory of convergence being how Homo erectus starts out of several different species living together. We do see with Homo erectus that it is also one of those species that seems to have a lot of morphological differences. And so many paleoanthropologists will qualify Homo erectus as one species with several subspecies. And many people will qualify Homo erectus as a completely separate species from species like Homo rudolfensis, Gaster, antecessor, and several other like 14 species, what again are by about half of paleoanthropology considered subspecies, and by about half of paleoanthropology considered separate species. And the reason that we've considered them this is we see within caves and within collapses, which is why we have found some of these older bones, or within landslides or things like that, which is why we found some of these older bones. What we believe to be groups of people living together in caves or in spaces and having this tragedy happen in that living space. So all people in one camp, which makes total sense. You don't have a whole lot of people that work like you, think like you, function like you. You're going to gather with all the people that function like you anyways. So when we're looking at that thought process within the last year, there's been research released stating that this is how they believe that Homo sapien is actually starting, is of a mix of all of these groups of people within Africa. So all of these different communities of people who are all mixed of different species are all living in Africa. And as they're living in Africa, which is a slightly broader space, really, than we think of today as well, because at this point, sea levels are fluctuating. You're going to see that at times it's going to be a little bit less, and at times it's going to be a little bit more on space. And that the spaces that are really fertile are going to fluctuate as well, right? So at this time, we're seeing several different communities of multiple species living together, and this convergence creates Homo erectus, and then this convergence creates us. So when we're looking at the other species that come out of Homo erectus and the subspecies of Homo erectus, or the different species living with Homo erectus, depending on what view you take of it, we're looking at a couple of spaces where one or two of those isolate. And when one or two of those isolate, you're going to see a speciation through what we have thought of before as the more likely speciation of humanity, which was speciation through isolation, which is one of those things that is like top of our level of how we've believed that species. And this is some really new information for a lot of people on the scientific level, because this is the way that scientists, that Western academics, that the ones who sit in control of that thought process have thought for a long time. So when we're looking at science, the earliest science that we see is in Homo erectus, because that earliest science is observing something in nature, is hypothesizing of what you can do, thinking of what you can do with that observation, is predicting what you can do with that observation, and is testing that. So when we're looking at rudimentary science that we see within corvids, or we see within other species today, we absolutely see it within other primates today. When we're looking at that across a broader scale, we see rudimentary science. I saw something in nature, I observe how to do it, and I, make something. With Homo erectus, we see the start of taking that and adapting it further, right? And so within Homo erectus, we see the first start of fire. And within that, this is not a beast. This is a 13-year-old child, Katie. Why would you call this a beast? This is a 13-year-old child. That's ridiculous. But thank you. I think she's beautiful. Right? So when we're looking at science within Homo erectus, what we're seeing is that start of fire. That start of, when we're looking at fire within Homo erectus, what we're seeing is that start of science. We're seeing that start of the advanced ability to work through how to make something work. When we look at the possibilities behind getting to a point of having fire, we have several different possibilities that we can get to, or several different possibilities that we can see that are going to get us to that point of fire. Give me 1 second. I apologize. I know. Sometimes it's hard for me to eat in the mornings, and sometimes it can get to a point where I'm not quite functional word-wise because I start slowing down a little bit. So, when we look at Homo erectus, we can see the start of fire. as this start of science, the start of actually taking an adaptation and adapting that adaptation further. Because when we're looking at science, we're looking at not just the taking a tool, a rudimentary science, and are taking something in nature that we see and making a tool to fit it, right? Because we see that with other things. When we're looking at that more advanced, we're looking at seeing that tool or seeing that ability and figuring out how to take it a step further. So when we're looking at tool making, we see them then taking the tools that Paranthropus boisei is using, the tools that is creating, and that the tools that Homo habilis is using, and they're taking them a step further. When we're looking at the first control of fire, what we're seeing is observing it in nature and seeing this mighty thing that has been used before. If a tree catches fire after being hit by lightning and there's like a cat in this tree, you're going to see that that cat is cooked, that this food smells good, that larger predators are going to come and take this cat. So you're going to see that early hominins, early humans are definitely going to be doing this anyways. So when you're taking this, or definitely going to be doing this and getting a taste for an idea, but not figuring out how to control fire and how to take it a step further. So when you see Homo erectus coming along this and Homo erectus developing the ability to control fire, to keep fire, to work with fire, what you're seeing is possibilities of things like coming across that cat in a tree, coming across that branch that's caught fire with something in it, right? And taking that and eating that and taking that branch back with you. And you might first control this or keep this by feeding it, right? You know that it likes wood, you know that it likes things. Well, they're homo at this point. They're not hominin. That's a step above hominin and hominid. So there's like a taxon of your species, and then your genus, and then your whatchamacallit. I think it's tribe next, but I can't remember if it's tribe next or if it's something else. I don't know really a whole lot. Well, I know, but not off the top of my head, I can pull it out of what the difference, but it's hominid, hominei, hominon, or something like that. And it goes back. And I never can remember past hominin. So it is hominin and then hominid, I believe, but it could be hominin and then hominei and then hominid. Right. So okay. I'm going to ignore the comments because I think it's being taken care of. So I'm just going to leave it. When we're looking at this advent of fire and the keeping of fire, you're going to see that it's likely that they were feeding it first, right? And now you want to find a way to keep it. So maybe you're like pulling a coal out and you're putting it on a rock, so you're going to save it for later. But since you're not feeding it, it dies. Maybe you learn that you have to, encase it in some sort of a soft tinder that keeps it going a little bit. And then you do that, but as you're feeding it, it just flames it out and it dies. So now you have to put something that's not so much tinder, maybe it's moist tinder around it. And then you can develop this idea of how to keep it by adapting and adapting. This didn't work. This is the testing phase of science. This didn't work, so we try something new. This didn't work, so we try something new. This worked, so we did something like this again. We tried it again. We retested it. So in every theory and every thought process that we have, I do have a shirt on, just so everybody knows. In every theory and every thought process that we have, we see that this thought of this didn't work, so we're discarding it. This works, so we're going to test it again. We're going to do it again. We're going to make it work again. And if we can make it work again, if we can get it to work again, then we know that it's working again. And we keep every time we're doing it, testing it until it doesn't work anymore. And then we have to go back to the thought process before and step forward. So this is this early science that you see takes holding fire to controlling fire. We see this within Homo erectus. So science and medicine goes back further than our species itself, which means that science and medicine is indigenous to Homo, to our species. Well, science. We haven't talked medicine yet. Science is indigenous to our species, that it comes from before our speciation into a species, and that it is part of how our species actually speciates, this use of science. And the use of fire is actually part of how our species speciates, because the use of fire gives Homo erectus the ability to cook their food. And in cooking their food, they get a greater caloric intake for a smaller amount of food. And when you have a greater caloric intake for a smaller amount of food, and you are pregnant, or you are having to feed a small child, or you are developing an infant's brain, or you are developing anybody's brain up into the end of brain development, which is currently 25. I'm sure it was much younger at prior stages of our development as a species, So when you take that brain development and you feed it extra calories, because all of the calories that we don't need for function go to brain. So when you do it, the brain grows bigger. The brain grows more complex. The brain becomes smarter. It becomes more malleable. It becomes more able to understand. This is how Homo neanderthalis get their large brains. This is how Denisovan gets their large brains. Homo neanderthal has larger brains than we do, right? We know now it's not the size, it's the shape that has everything to do with it. But we do see, not that. And so we see that Homo neanderthal having larger brains doesn't necessarily mean that they were what we would want to think of as smarter than we are. Though I also really feel like the idea of us being smarter than so many other things is way, way wrong personally. We do have mods in the chat, correct? Okay. Just double checking. This seems to be really... Yeah, okay, so I'm taking it out because this just seems to be really wonky today. So we're just going to do it this way. Thank you, Kimber. I've got to go through and delete mods. I have you get a limit of mods, 30, and I know that there are people that are here but not here. I know a lot of it is my time that I'm on and stuff like that is different, because some people were here in the evening that aren't here now. I'm just going to do it that way. I want everybody to know that if you have any questions, if you have any comments that you need, you can absolutely find me on YouTube. I think I recently changed it so it doesn't have all the dots. It's just Enwita Ord. So at Enwita Ord on YouTube, and I'm streaming live over there. You can go over there and you can subscribe there. I always go live there as well. And it notifies you. And you can also comment there, and it's a little bit less of this. I apologize that it got so bad. I wasn't really noticing. I was trying not to notice the comments, because I know that sometimes it can be okay to have them going. Sometimes they can be a positive thing, and sometimes they can be a very negative thing. And I apologize for letting it go on that long. If you are here to be a shithead, you can go somewhere else. See, TikTok gives everybody who has 1,000 followers live streaming access. They take it away randomly when they don't like the way I behave. But, they tend to give it back because of the fact that I tend to be honest and truthful and anti-racist and anti-hate. And I tend to spend most of my time schooling that shit. And so TikTok tends to give it back. But if you want to make your own shitty, nasty, blah, 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 whatever the fuck you have going on in your stupid fucking head that makes you feel like it's okay to treat people like that, to make racist statements, to be shitty to other human beings on a public platform, to just all around prove yourself to be what everybody says you are, right? Prove them right. Prove them right. Go for it. Not this space and not this place. I don't deal with it very well. I look white, but I ain't. I'm anything but. Okay. A. B. I belong nowhere, so I belong everywhere. I belong nowhere, so I belong everywhere. Absolutely. And the experience of my life has taught me that I cannot allow people to behave shittily around me. Well, I can find a positive way to feed off of their hatred, not feed their hatred, but to shut it down and to try and better shit a little bit, then I will. And if not for them, then for somebody. It took me probably 40 something years to learn boundaries, but I've learned them. And you can't be shitty in my space. And this is the space that TikTok gives me. So this is a space that I have the ability to set the rules and the boundaries for, just like my home. Don't act like a shit in my space. Take your shit to somebody else's space. Be hateful in somebody else's space. I do not know if you were saying that they is a Native American and was talking about me. They works as she, he, we is my pronouns. TikTok won't allow we. Um, they, them works, but sometimes it throws me because I am Gen X, right? I'm an older generation. I don't look like it for most people, but I am old. So sometimes it throws me a bit, and I'm not sure if you were talking directly towards me. I'm Indigenous. That includes Turtle Island indigeneity. It includes Abialian indigeneity and my ancestors. It includes growing up within Turtle Island Indigenous community. I'm also so mixed, so across the globe, with ancestors everywhere, none of which I got to connect to the exact space of those ancestors and be a part of. Indigenous to me is that trying to connect to the space that I am in, right? Through the ancestral knowledge of the indigenous spaces that I've come from. I am in part Native American. I wouldn't call myself Native American really, only because it's a term that I wouldn't use anymore. And I would also state that that is specific to people who were colonized by the United States government more than it's about all peoples of Turtle Island and Abiala. We see the people in Canada are generally First Nations. We see a lot of people who are detribalized across the space who wouldn't call themselves Native American because it would have a different connotation. So I would not consider myself to be really, in the way that we talk about it these days, to be that, right? So that doesn't limit my knowledge. It doesn't limit my understanding of my ancestors in different spaces. It doesn't limit any of that stuff because I grew up in those communities. It's not anything I've ever studied. It's not anything that I've ever studied. I lived, right? So I, for myself, have studied other histories well more than that. And so I don't really talk about my Turtle Island indigeneity or my Avialian indigeneity and their things. And that's actually one thing that was a problem that was like I kind of got dragged into. Um, and that's one thing that I kind of want to touch on, but I don't know if I want to touch on. When we are looking at reconnecting, we have to make sure that our reconnection is done in a positive and honorable way. When we are looking at, I don't want to do it with this background though. When we look at reconnecting, we have to look at reconnecting in a positive and honorable way. Everybody needs to, or you're going to learn that you have to look at it that way. You're either going to do it or you're going to learn that you're going to have to do it. I'm not ever going to be involved in helping. I mean, like, unless I like no for a no for a no, I understand everything going on in the situation. It's not going to be something where you're going to see me correct somebody. It's not my space, especially on whether or not they are, right? I want to state, though, that when we are reconnecting, and this means my reconnection journey has been outside of these spaces, as I was just kind of stating. And when I'm trying to reconnect to spaces outside of these spaces, outside of the spaces that I grew up connected to, right? When I'm trying to learn something new, I don't go to, it is not my knowledge to give yet, it's my knowledge to earn. Okay. It is not my knowledge to give yet, it is my knowledge to earn. And it is my time to sit and listen. Not always good at that. I don't listen very well sometimes. I try very hard. I am a pebble dropper. And so when I try very hard, sometimes my engagement detracts from the conversation. And that's not positive. And I'm learning and I'm working on that. But it is my space when I am reconnecting to listen, to learn, to sit at the feet of those with knowledge, usually elders. Culture keepers is something that I would state, as it's not always elders, right? And some people are older rather than elder, right? I believe that the best that you can do is to sit and listen from culture keepers and shut your mouth for a while. Again, not an easy thing for me to do. When we are looking at reconnecting, we must respect that there are things that should not be put out there. There are understandings and knowledges that should not be put out there on a public scale. And only culture keepers can understand what a culture would not wish to go on a public scale, right? And therefore, we should also not be telling stories that we probably shouldn't tell. We might tell public knowledge stories, right? Like I personally would never go and tell Turtle Island Indigenous culture anywhere. It's not my space and place, even though I don't view myself as being disconnected from that culture. Yeah, I might, with much laud to her as I do it, read Robin Wall Kilmer's story of Sky Woman, right? So that I can show to you something that is somebody who I believe has the right to share it. And the, like she's doing this as somebody who is keeping culture alive, right? So she has the right to share it. So it's something that is willingly public knowledge, right? And I make sure that it is her voice that I am uplifting, not my voice that I am uplifting, right? With it, right? So when we are looking at trying to ensure that we have our connection, our reconnection journey in a positive light, when we are doing everything that we can, good morning, Decray, when we are doing everything that we can to ensure that our reconnection journey is in a positive manner. These are the things that should be the basis of our reconnecting journey. Now, this doesn't mean that they're the only things in your reconnection journey. They do need to be the basis of. This is to any Indigenous culture. This is to any culture that has existed for thousands of years, that you unless your parents are growing up in, or your culture is a part of that community that you might not, or that your family is a part of that community you're having to reconnect through, right? You need to ensure that your reconnection starts with not passing on knowledge that you don't fully understand yet, or fully understand the weight of that knowledge on the community, as well as always putting yourself in the hands of culture keepers and listening. This is harder when you are not in a space that you can actually do this, right? Say I am trying to reconnect to, first one that comes to my mind is my Sami roots. So say I'm trying to reconnect to my Sami roots and I am in the United States, right? Trying to reconnect to my Sami roots and I'm in the United States. I don't have friends for Sami, which I do, though I have not talked to them about that reconnection journey. So, that's not something that, I don't know, right? Anyways, so I'm trying to reconnect and I don't have access to local people who are able to connect me through those routes, right? How do I reconnect and make sure that these people that I'm trying to listen to are actually culture keepers, are actually people who have the weight to learn? Now, for a long time, this is something that really troubled people within Turtle Island who were trying to reconnect after things like the 60s swoop, after things like, them not ending the taking children from homes until the 70s. So they're still really kind of doing it too, but until ICWA came into play, right? So children trying to reconnect to Indigenous parents so often, grandparents so often, lost with complete. I have people in my life personally who have gone through this, right? Trying to reconnect to that root that was torn from them, right? People in detribalized areas trying to reconnect to that root that is torn from them, right? And they're in that space, right? So how do they find A, which culture they belong to sometimes, and B, the keepers of that culture to find. And so there are books that I had family members who were reading, when I was a child, because those books were thought to be written by members of nations, by culture keepers, only for people to find out later on that these people were not. They were culture vultures. They were people who were stealing culture and profiting off of it. So if it's difficult to figure that out when you are actually in the same space, how do you do it when it's an entire continent away, an entire globe away? You read as much as you can and you find as much as you can. And when things start to double down and triple down, and you can dig a little deeper, you go towards those whose understandings seem to be if you find 10 sources and one source says things that none of the other 10 sources say, that source is probably not likely, especially if they're all talking about being 10 living sources, right? If you've got 3 sources that share several of the same ideas, those three sources are more likely to have some more idea deeper, right? To have some cross checking ability, right? Say 50% of those three sources ideas are shared by four people, and 20% of those resources are shared by two people. Uh, you might see that uh, some of the first one who was really outlandish actually kind of looks like it's a little bit like some of this from this, but more like this, right? So you might see that they're picking it up from somewhere else a little bit. So you're going to take those three sources as kind of a primary, but kind of pick up some more from the ones that are a little bit broader and yet have these three sources foundation within them. Not all of it though. And again, you're going to want to cross and you're going to want to dig deeper. And you're not going to announce it. Like it's not something that you're going to be public about. Reconnecting is not a public journey, right? It's not a, I mean, it can be to some extent, and it can very much help, you know, to have that public journey if you do it in the right way. But explaining your understanding as the right understanding on a reconnecting journey wouldn't be appropriate. So when you're looking at trying to reconnect and you're trying to do it from a distance, it's very difficult. I'm not going to lie to you on any level. You're going to have to do a lot of parsing. You're going to have to do a lot of shifting. You're going to have to really study. The thing about reconnecting is not, and being connected is not claiming that you're of something that you never talk to, that you're never a part of, right? Like, so if I was reconnecting to Sami, I could learn everything in the whole wide world about Sami culture. There's living Sami culture. I had to have to be a part of that living Sami culture, right? That's not something that happens without human connection, without talking to people, without, and we live in a day and an age where we can do that 100%. We would need to make sure that we're doing it not as a social media thing, though. Instead, it needs to be something where you go home. If that's your home, you feel the earth. I personally can't travel right now. Can't get a passport. 2020, the pandemic, everything else, can't get a passport. So I can't do the traveling that I have planned on doing by now. Raise the kids, they're out of the house, it should be gone. When I can, it will be tasting the dirt in every single space that I visit. It'll be tasting the plants. I mean, not all of them, some of them are poisonous, but it will be connecting. You cannot connect to a place that you have never been. And being indigenous is about space, right? You can become indigenous to a space through connecting to the indigenous of that space and the indigenous knowledge of that space. Absolutely, it is still someplace you became instead of someplace that you've always been, right? So you need to feel the earth beneath your feet. Feel the earth move under my feet. Like you have to get into that. And that is what you're aiming for. That is the connect, right? So reconnecting is about a private journey that you can share your journey because that's what you know at that point. Reconnecting is about a private journey that you can share because it's your journey. And it's about connecting to community, right? It is not about it needs to be about that for it to be reconnecting in a positive way. You can reconnect in any way you want to. Absolutely. Everybody can for it to be positive. And when the schooling of that happens, if it's not done in the best of ways, uh, even if the intent is the best, if it's not done in the best of ways and some happens online, something happens on an online and a public platform. Um, if you are not a member of one of the communities, like if you are not a member of that community, uh, attacking other communities for not being on board is not a positive either. That's not ally or accomplice at all. It's actually kind of creating lateral issues between communities, and that's not appropriate either. So I want to ensure that that is also known. I feel that, and this is why none of this shit's supposed to be social media, like, or at least not how we build platforms, right? This can be community that we find within social media. It should not be how we're. I want to ensure that as I reconnect, that my reconnection journey is always done in a way that brings honor to the people that I'm reconnecting to. It is not just about the land, right? It is about the entire biome of that land. And the entire biome of that land includes not just the people, it includes the trees, it includes the plants, it includes the dirt, it includes the animals. For we're all just animals or plants. Okay? Some days I'd rather be a plant. It includes all of us. And because it includes all of us, when I am trying to reconnect to a community, it is the entirety of the biome of that community. Reconnecting also needs to be done in a space where your fight is my fight. If I'm trying to be a part of that community, your fight is my fight. And we must understand that different peoples within every community are going to have different thought processes. That's why community works, right? Community works because you have several dozens of people who all have brains that work differently. The idea that there's really a neurotypical is kind of weird, right? But all have brains that work in different manners, and all have brains that work in different ways and go in different spaces. And when you have a community that works like that, then technology happens, then newer knowledge happens. When you have a bunch of different brains converging in a space, that is an explosion of knowledge, and that explosion of knowledge is really what changes everything through everything through everything. Meetings of minds create, and boredom. Meetings of minds and boredom create, right? So when you see that convergence, right, you see that explosion of thought. This is how we get things like newer tools or technology or every step of the way, right? We see things that different minds coming together. A community means different minds coming together to reach a conclusion. Some things you're never going to reach a unanimous conclusion on. In the archaeological community, you might not ever in paleoanthropology reach a unanimous conclusion on whether or not all the different subspecies of Homo erectus or subspecies of Homo erectus or different species, right? And I'm obviously, because I keep saying it, in the first category, because that was what category my mentor was in, or not my mentor, but the person who taught me was in. And because of that, I definitely look at it through that lens, right? So all communities are going to have different thought processes. It is those different thought processes meetings that gives us the ability to be better, do more things, grow, right? So having to have that community and having to have all of those minds meeting and having to have that knowledge to be a part of that community, you're going to find different groups within that community who are going to have different thought processes and different minds. You're going to have people who are more radical than other people. And you're going to have people who are reconnecting, who are on all different thought processes within the communities, right? So, burn it all to the ground always, land back always. Any verbalization of that, any fight for that, any hope for that, any return to, to belonging, any return to belonging to space that we are tending and supposed to care for, any return to that every day. And nobody is ever going to get me to school anybody on any of that shit. Don't think it. Don't even think it. It's never going to happen. And more than everybody, or many people, or I would say that there are probably, there are 8 billion people on this planet, so maybe only 100 million other people would understand. I understand where that thought process, where the first colonizers, where the first idea of colonization is coming from. So if the war is between two people who are colonizing and not colonizing, I'm always going to set my hat with those who are on the land back side and burning it to the ground. Colonization, the idea that we should have a mono thought, is ridiculous and disgusting to me. So I absolutely support that on anybody's reconnecting to me. Okay. I would state 100% that you have to understand what it is that your community needs before you go out and let everybody else know. Because of the fact that if you don't state what your community needs, know what your community needs before you go out and let everybody else know, then you will probably be letting them know the wrong things for your community. Only because judging what a community needs, having never lived within a community based on your knowledge, is colonizer thought process. So if that's what you're going in and doing, it doesn't work. And we're all indoctrinated into that thought process. So it's understandable that we would all have that. Yet the coined white savior thought process isn't going to help anybody. Right? It doesn't do anything. We are pretty low, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the comments back on. So I might turn them back off if we get to a point where I put the other picture back up and it gets hot again, which I'm probably going to. I just wanted to touch on this. Social media and comment sections are never the place to do these things, though. So I would ensure myself personally that, take it to fucking something else besides the comment section of social media before, it becomes a confusing thread for everybody involved. Just because nobody's learning anything, right? So, and I don't know if a couple of the people that I've talked to about this, and I am, because they can tell how old I am in DM, since since they have messaged me about a specific situation. I'll go ahead and message them directly so that they know what I'm talking about directly. But I don't want to actually get involved in cross stuff. I would just state, I want to make sure that anybody who is listening to me on any form, it is very imperative to my understanding, that connection is done in a way that is quiet. It is done in a way, and I'm not saying that you can't be proud and announce. What I'm saying is that one must have no lips instead of no ears. Because one is connecting with no ears, one learns nothing. When one is connecting with no ears and only lips, um, then one is not connecting, one is not even hearing. So, how can you connect to something you don't even hear? Okay. Hello, hello. So, I think that it's very important that one opens their ears and closes their lips. There's a song by Rising Appalachia. It says, I am resilient. I trust the movement. I negate the chaos. Uplift the negative. I sit down at the table again and again. I close my mouth and learn to listen. That for me, I had to listen to that on repeat for a year, I swear. When I was going through serious trauma, it was the only thing that set me back down, right? Was able to reset me. I closed my mouth and I learned to listen. And I think that there's a lot of people that we have to do that. A lot of us have to do that. We have to close our mouth and learn to listen. Um, it is definitely something I've failed at in the past. And as such, nobody understood me and I understood nobody. Right? So definitely if you are working on reconnecting, that is important, especially if you are trying to learn how to reconnect through me. And I don't want to be anybody's pathway to reconnection. My thought process with that is I will tell you about your ancient ancestors, but I'm not going to tell you about your direct ancestors. The reasoning with that is I can tell you who we always were. I can tell you the shift and the change. I can tell you, where to go to dig to find information. I can tell you some of the little things that I have learned, like migration patterns. I can tell you how interconnected and interwoven it's always been. I can show you where DNA has tracked, but not tell you anything otherwise. Don't do DNA. Telling you culture is not ever going to be my space and place. I will tell you my thought processes or how I work some things. I will absolutely not put my stuff out there as belonging to any indigenous culture, though, unless I'm talking like specifically like Ogham is very obviously Celtic, so our from the Celtoid people, right? So, and mainly from certain regions, right? So I will tell you things like that, um, and I might tell you how I work it, but I don't ever want anybody to ever think that I am a reconnecting space or space to reconnect to because my reconnection journey has been such a web, right? That my practices are so, what is the word? And I know the word, intersectional. My practices are so intersectional, right? I don't, my altar, which really needs to be set up since I've moved to the house, it's not completely any space. It is every space. It has different things. It's, there's, it's the way that do things in this world might be based on the ideas that I got as a child from one culture and still carry heavy influence that's something else I picked up from another culture, right? So it's going to have this wide variety of interconnectedness. And therefore, I could never really teach you anything to do with culture. So I can teach you how to find reconnection, and I can hopefully help you on your journey for reconnection. I'm not a space to reconnect to. Maybe I'm a space to connect to. Um, and I would never want anybody to take away from anything that I have said. The idea that going out and sharing, that they should not connect in what I might consider to be a positive way. Because, I mean, don't take away from my teaching something that's not what I would intend to think, right? So, please know that for me, I feel that to connect in a positive way, one must close their mouth and learn to listen, and one must, well, sharing their journey, make sure that they're sharing their journey and not sharing things that culture keepers might not need them, might not want shared. Um, Always figure out what it is that the community that you're trying to connect to needs, and not what you think that they need, but what you can contribute to that community and provide that. And it's not something that you're going to figure out on your own. It's something you're going to figure out through those connections and through those webs, because that's what you're supposed to be doing, right? Yes. Well, and Kylie, I had that as well, where I had like, so I I went through a period of time where I could speak, but not about anything that mattered, if that makes sense. Like, when I would try to connect, it wasn't working very well. But when like I got shut down so much and learned not to speak and learned that I couldn't be honest or truthful, because if I was going to be punished for it. And so it was very difficult for me to speak, because I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I don't lie. I can tell you, will tell you that I'm a really shitty liar. Like, you're going to know, like, like, I'm not a good liar. Right. Um, and that, well, I'm human, so we do shit, but, I try not to, so like, I learned to stop talking, and I actually got told that I had to by a pressure. Like, he wasn't an acupuncturist, but he was like pressure points with massage and a bunch of other stuff, and just an all around worker. And he was like, you just really need to start talking again. And so I would talk to videos, like I would drive and talk to videos while I was driving, and that's how I was able to start talking. And recently, my psychiatrist explained it as you don't trust anybody else with what you're saying. And so you have to talk to yourself, because you don't trust anyone else with what you're saying. So I try and trust other people with the things I'm saying now. Uh, but like, when I would talk over, it wasn't like I was talking. Sometimes I would try with connection. I would try to talk over with some weight. But for the most part, when I was talking over, it wasn't things with weight. It was pebbles of knowledge, but not necessarily pertinent. And I should have probably listened anyways, right? It's important that we talk too, because we all have information that must be. Okay, this is kind of Celestine prophecies, right? Um, and so, I would say that it's a thought process, but I'm not sure if there's a whole lot of biological behind it or science behind it. Within Celestine prophecies, I read it like 13. There was this convert or this thought process on interchange, and it was talking about having conversations and pausing like, you'll know when it's your turn to speak, having those conversations when you know it's your turn to speak, right? I was never very good at that. um, for me, one thing that was very pertinent within that chapter, or that space that it was talking about, this is the thought process that we all have information and knowledge that needs to be brought to the table. Every single human being on this planet has a lived experience that contains knowledge that needs to be brought to the table. Um, some of us might not know quite yet what it is that we're really good at, that's really our thing, right? Um, and yet, we all have information that needs to be brought to the table. I'm a Smurf. Act like Papa Smurf. I know that you would probably think me a little bit more girly, but nope, I'm Papa. Definitely Papa Smurf. Um, so that's my spiel on reconnection and the reconnection journey, only because it's been part of the thing that's keeping me out of TikTok right now. Um, and because it kind of came up in the course of the conversation about the stuff on the wall. So I'm going to go ahead and put it back to the wall. No, you view me as girly. This isn't girly. This is comfortable. And do you kind of view comfortable as girly? And I'm not sure why. I kind of find it weird, but do you, boo? Do you? So let's go back. Oh, you're so angry, angry beaver. Okay. So I'll let comments stay on unless it gets bad, and then I'll go ahead and take them off till it gets down to not a lot of people anymore. Um, we were in why science is indigenous. Let's go into why medicine is indigenous. When we look at medicine within uh, species prior to us, we actually see medicine within Neanderthal. And seeing medicine within Neanderthal, it got darker. Seeing medicine within Neanderthal um, goes back to about 70,000 years, I believe. Sometimes I'm a little off with dates, so I might be a little off on that, but only within a couple of tens of years, right? Thank you. So with medicine with the Neanderthals, what we see with medicine in Neanderthals, so I guess back to 90,000 years ago, if we're seeing Krebs at 90,000 years ago, which is, I think, Krebs. When we're looking at medicine within Neanderthals, we're looking at not only things that we see within the skeletal structure, um, but things that we see within the tooth enamel. So first, which is part of the skeleton, right? Teeth, but it's that plaque on top of it. First, what we're seeing with the skeletal structures, we're seeing that we have two actual skeletons that show evidence of medicine. We see one that we know of quite commonly as Krebs from the Earth's Children series from Jean M. All. Krebs is based on Shanidar 1, the old man is Shanidar, who I believe actually, it was either the old man of Shanidar or La Chapelle 1, the other one, who actually DNA tested as being biologically female. We actually now know that within Neanderthals, it looks like it is the female Neanderthals that are larger and have a tendency to show more of like the hunting wear and tear, or the things that we would associate with the hunter part of a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, though we are now understanding that there's not as much gathering in a hunter-gatherer lifestyle and pretty much everybody is hunting. Um, when we're looking at with medicine within Neanderthals and seeing this within Krebs, what we're seeing within Shanidar 1 is that Shanidar 1 is an older individual, and Shanidar 1 has an injury to the skull that when it happened, um, they're not exactly sure at what stage in life it happened, but it caused atrophy to the arm and it caused atrophy to one of the legs, and it caused partial blindness, like full blindness in one eye and partial blindness in the other eye, and full deafness in one ear and partial deafness in that other ear. We see that the arm atrophied, and then the bottom part of the arm, I believe, is gone completely through atrophy, and then the leg withered. So when we're looking at this, or the forearm at the bottom part of the arm, when we're looking at this, we're seeing that Shanidar 1 is an individual who would have had to have had care provided for them. So this is a stove in on the skull. So like a rock fell and hit them on the skull. Um, it could be, we don't, it's not like it's evidence of violence. It's one of those possible evidences of violence, right? Yet if it is an evidence of violence, it's an evidence of care right afterwards. We generally contributed it to, like a cave fall. It could be other things. When we see violence in skeletons prior to 10,000 years ago, out of 2,000 skeletons, we see roughly 2% have things that could be attributed to violence. This is one of those 2,000 or 2% that could be attributed to violence. So when we're looking at Shanidar 1, after this incident happens, Shanidar 1 is needing care to stay alive. And then Shanidar 1 is going to need care to ensure as they go along that when this arm atrophies out of use, they have care there. When the leg atrophies out of use, they have care there. They're going to need community. They're going to need somebody to take care of them through all aspects of life post this. Um, this is something that could have happened as a child, and they learned from there. This is something that could have happened as a young adult. It's something that could have happened, you know, later on in life, though. To my knowledge, I do not remember any understanding of there being any wear and tear on the body that would have associated him with or them with having um, like a rougher lifestyle, like they weren't having a heavier muscular attachment than normal to go out and do heavier muscular things. So it's not like we see that they actually were out doing a whole lot, um, to my remembrance of knowledge of the skeleton. So when we're looking at that, it's more likely childhood or young adult than later in age. Um, so this is showing that a member of community who may have not had a higher standing in community, right, is not only a valued member of community, but their life is saved with medical intervention, with the ability to heal them, right? What we see with this, we see also carried down into La Chapelle one. La Chapelle one is another older skeleton or older of age skeleton. And La Chapelle one is also a Neanderthal find, and La Chapelle one is missing a forearm. And La Chapelle uh, is older, doesn't have like most of their teeth. Um, and I think that there's another disease process going on with La Chapelle, but I can't remember the exact off the top of my head right this moment. So we see with La Chapelle one that the missing of the forearm isn't necessarily an amputation. It could be born without, or it could be, I don't think it's born without from the evidence that they have. Uh, it could be cat bit it off or something like that. We've recently found shark hunting stuff happen in an ancient human Homo sapiens, so maybe it was Neanderthal shark hunting, you know? So it could be other things with La Chapelle one, though La Chapelle is in France. With La Chapelle one, so it's probably not a shark, but it could be like a bear or something like that. With La Chapelle one, we see that this requires healing after the fact. This requires something happening after the fact to ensure that they're taken care of. When we are looking at teeth in Neanderthal, we see that there is remnants of, we've been doing a lot of study recently of the isotopes and the remnants of matter within the plaque on teeth. They started developing this ability to do it a few years ago, and this ability to do this is really coming forward and actually giving us a lot of information and actually moving in different ways too. We're actually now TNA testing the strands of when the hair strands have lice. Uh, there's like the shaft that's created around the hair, and you can test it for the DNA from the scalp of the person. So when we're looking at the evidence of food and the evidence of things eaten within the teeth within Neanderthals, what we're seeing in the plaque is that there are medicinal herbs being eaten. These herbs don't have any caloric intakes. They're not just something you're going to be eating, and they're extremely bitter. So they're not something you're necessarily going to be using for flavoring. Though we do see that Neanderthals, are quite foodies. They built ovens. They had crab. Like there's many different things that Neanderthals used that were awesome. My soda's going to make me a little gassy for a second. I apologize. All that air I'm trying to expel. So we see this as medicine within Neanderthals. As we're finding more information, we'll probably see more. Like this is another one of those areas that we're finding more information on all the time. And in that finding of more information with Neanderthals, with other species, the new understanding of our ability to speciate in a prior theoretical thought process, right? As we're moving forward with all of this knowledge, we're going to see that all of this knowledge is going to spin us into a new space all the time, right? As we're seeing this convergence and as we're seeing this interaction and this understanding and this knowledge, and as we're seeing this new information constantly coming forth, these new understandings are popping out. Recently, we've seen studies published within, scientific journals, and we've seen them even published within mainstream of the fact that hunter gatherers were more hunters and gatherers, and that the women participated in the hunting as much as the men did. So the idea that hunting and gathering was men hunting, women gathering is completely out the window. And we've actually proven that through the idea that you can actually subsist your gathering quotient, because we are omnivorous and we do have to have both meat and vegetable. And so the gather quotient that you get absolutely can come from the stomach contents of animals that have done this, that have eaten, right? Fresh stomach contents. Oh God, I can't remember the name for it, and there's a specific name, and it's kind of weird, but the contents of the stomach from freshly eaten food, you can actually, as humans, eat and get the needed quotient of vitamins. The needed, it's not rudiment. Is it rudiment? I remember that it was kind of one of those off, like it was a word that was a word that was like, but anyways, the content of the stomach. Um, in the So that knowledge is from a paper that I did in college on medicine within Neanderthals. I have the study itself that's within it. I do not remember. I know that they published what the isotopes were, but I do not remember if they published the actual names of the plants. I can actually take a look and see if I can find it. Thank you, Askew. Have a great day. Thank you. I appreciate it. I think that humans need meat because meat is great for grain development and grain growth, and it's kind of how you got your brain development and brain growth. Without cooking meat, actually, we would not have the size of the brains that we have, and we know that paleoanthropologically. So I believe that having fish oils and having meat fat and having bone marrow are things that science has proven we're able to create the excess calories we needed once they were cooked, especially, that created the growth of our brains from Homo erectus to Homo neanderthal sized brains, which were larger than ours, right? So cats don't cook their meat, and cats actually have quick brain growth, and so our brains only grow for a specific period of time. And in Homo erectus, it was less time. And in Homo neanderthal, it was in less time. We have, personally, sapien has 5 life stages from neonate to adult. And that's fully formed brain, right? So from the time we're born to the time we're fully formed in our brain is the time of brain growth. So if you're feeding extra calories when you're getting the growing of the infant in utero, and you're getting the growing of the infant freshly out of utero, um, and cats have extremely short lifespan, or not lifespans, life stages, and they don't have a whole lot. So that's part of the reason the brain growth isn't there. And another part of the reason the brain growth isn't there is because they're not eating excess fatty oils and stuff like we are to get that brain growth, right? So that's why. Absolutely. So let me get back. Where was I? Okay. So let me look at my paper and I'll see if I can find the paper, and then I'll get back to you on that one, or I'll try to, Mama. That was that, Mama. Hold on a second. Yeah, it was. Okay. Okay. I'll see what I can find on it, Mama. Um, Social stratification was not required. I think social stratification is a fault. Stratification actually is a failure within us. It's I think it is an experiment that proved wrong from its start, that proved like that it was failing from its start. How did I know what I did? I no, fuck off. My room is just so much darker. I think it proved wrong from a start, and I think that in that proving wrong from a start, we see that it actually really fucked everything up. I think along with agriculture, monoculture, Western style agriculture, those are the two things that have created the issues that we're in right now. And I think that for a couple of different reasons. It's going to bother me. My brain gets totally diverted by it. Give me 2 seconds. I don't know where the light went out in the room, but it did. And it's making me feel like it's really dark behind me. And it will totally trip me out for the rest of the live if I can't make it stop. And I know that that's stupid. I get it. But that's my brain. So we're just going to do that. Social stratification wasn't required for the transition into agricultural society. I think social stratification is so our first kings, our first social stratification comes with this megalomania narcissistic thought process. We see that most of the stories that we have about like Inki and Enlil, uh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, not, God, I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, and I'm going to get back and forth in two or three. But all of the older stories that we have, I have a book on it. And the translations of them. And in reading them, you very much see that I pulled it out recently because I think I read it on here recently or was finding it on here recently. This is the specific one on Egypt. So when you're looking at it, what you're seeing is that these different these kings coming in all share similar stories, and all are very similar to the Moses story as well. It is a child who is found in the river or found in a field, a foundling. It is a foundling. And this foundling child is adopted by somebody who doesn't have a lot of money. And this founding child believes that they are the child of a god. Moses doesn't believe they're the child of a god, but they're a prophet. But the foundling child in these early god kings believes that they are the child of a god. They must be a child of one of the deities, of the deity of the river, of the deity of the mountain, of one of the deities. And when the foundling child believes that they are, the child of the deity, but they're raised in this very extremely poor situation to their mind, and it's always somebody who is tending the land. It's always somebody who is isolated and tending the land who is raising them, right? So, like Paris's goat herding parents on a mountainside kind of thing, right? Like with most of them, they call them a gardener, right? There is this poor singular human tending land. We need community to tend land. Tended land actually provides way more for us than monocultural land. It could be the fact that we're dealing with early farming as well. We do see that monoculture outside of city stratification, outside of control, having just your own little plant area that you're trying to do monoculture starts around 18,000 years ago along the Nile. The Nile is one of these. The Nile is probably the true crescent of humanity. The true fertile valley is honestly probably the Nile. This is more than the fertile crescent. The Nile has always cradled us, right? So the first advent of trying to grow wheat and stuff like that in a singular culture happens along the Nile. Then we see the husbanding of that into specific grains later on. And so we see within that husbanding of that into specific grains that there are farming peoples and communities that live. But we see that this narcissistic God king gets taken in by somebody who is farming or tending on their own. And in doing this, they don't really have a whole lot. It, Farming is not a great way to make a living. It doesn't give you all you need. It only gives you a little bit. You have to have broader community. And when you isolate, it's not good. And when you try and do it in, a stratified society, it's also not good. But farming alone is very not subsisting. You're removing all of the nutrients for you and for the plants from the environment, and you're planting a singular plant that now has to struggle to get nutrients, right? So farming has always been a subsistent living, whereas tending, whereas taking the biome that you're within, that you belong to, and tending it and keeping it clean, and taking what you need to eat but not taking everything, which prunes, right? And shepherding maybe some things to give it a little bit more, like you see that the same size grain was shepherded into wheat as was shepherded into corn in Turtle Island and Abayala. It was tended by monoculture into wheat across, and it's not the same corn, it's just or the same grain, it's just the same size of grain. I do want to be specific. But you tended into wheat, shepherded into wheat by control in a monoculture or a mono agriculture society, and in a space where tending, where we've heard of the Three Sisters method. There are several other methods of tending that got corn from a small grain to the big ear that it is today, right? So when we see tending, we see something that doesn't even really guide, it just helps, right? Like, what do you need today, right? It's a part of that biome. So we look at monoculture and we see our mono agriculture, and we see everything of nutrient that's in the biome is ripped out and they plant. So it's a very low sustenance living, very low sustenance livability. And when you see this, you see that narcissistic God kings all belong to foundlings within this class. They don't have anything, and they develop this idea that they are the child of a god, right? This is classic psychopathy, narcissism, megalomania, right? This is classic of this, right? And when we're looking at that, we see that they then institute stratification within the local farming communities to create a city. They get a few people to follow them, right? They get a few people to believe in them. This is something that is pretty easy for people along that class. They're often very charismatic, or not class, but that disorder. They're often very charismatic. And so they get a few people. So now they have a handful of soldiers, right? Handful of bullies, probably, right? Maybe people that they've bullied, and that's how they've gotten to, create this bullying, right? Maybe because their foster parent was alone, and it's hard scrabble, and they had to help and to work, and that's why they were taken in the first place, to have another body there. Maybe that is what shifted within them and created the narcissism along with the abandonment, right? But gathering themselves a few different people together. One second, my cat's knocking at my back door. Never mind. So when we see that, you gather together a few people and you go to the next farm over and you start bullying people into a community. Or maybe you go into a community And we see that the rise of stratification is at the same time as the rise of violence. We see that those 2,000 skeletons with 2% of possible violence become thousands of skeletons at 16 to 18% of absolute violence. Maybe it's 13 to 18%. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I know it's in the early double digits of absolute evidence of violence after 10,000 years. As we start to see stratification enter in, as we start to see people taking over agricultural communities and turning agricultural communities into cities and starting this I rule. I have my soldiers who are keeping the everybody in check, right? And you give me your food so I can hoard it to feed my soldiers who you're paying to protect you from the barbarians in the hills. We see the start of othering rise at this point as well. We go from communities where everybody is living together, where 14 different possible subspecies or completely different species of Homo erectus are living together, and Homo erectus are living together to create Homo sapien, where we are living with Neanderthals and Denisovans and species that was here in Turtle Island from the Cerutomastodon find, and a species that's in Australia from the Moy site, and several other species that we know of on the planet, right? So as we're living with these species and intermixing with these species, three ghost species in South Africa, and West Africa, as we're mixing with these species and we're living in all these different communities, we go from that to how dare you? You're going to kill me and take my food. I need to pay these people to protect me from you taking my food. So we see that the rise of stratification, the rise of monoagriculture, and the rise of othering are all at the same time, and they're all very interconnected. They go along with the rise of violence. It's all very interconnected. I don't believe that these things are in any level a positive for our species' advancement. We should not be 8 billion people on this planet. That's not positive for our species' advancement. And we are 8 billion people on this planet because the rise of that gave us the rise of the need to have more people in my city than more people in your city so that you couldn't take me over, right? The idea that we should breed heavily, right? The idea that we should have lots and lots of children. We didn't have lots and lots of children before this, and most of our children didn't die in infancy before this. Now, of course, infant bones degrade faster than anything else, so finding infant bones would be a lot harder. Yet we also know that it is cities that create our first rise of diseases, really, and our first plagues. Like, cities are dirty and diseased. You just think of it. You have however many people you have all shitting and pissing in the same space, and all of their trash, all of their waste, all in the same space. That alone should tell you that cities are, from their very start, disease ridden, right? So early cities really create the need to have a bunch of children because half of your children are going to die. I do not think that we outcompeted. So evidence shows that we actually enveloped species that we came in contact with. So Homo neanderthal was very small by the time we came in contact with them. They had like they are 600,000 years of a species, and they had two almost extinction events. And by the time we came in contact with them, they say that there's about 10,000 of them left. They were interbred at this point of time. All of our later family structures, we're seeing a lot of interbreeding in, and that is because there's so few of them left. So when they start coming in contact with Homo sapien, they're a small group. So when they're intermixing with Homo sapien and they're interbreeding with Homo sapien, what they're getting is outside genetics, right? They can see the effects of interbreeding. We're all and always have been aware. We're conscious. We can see things around us, part of what makes us humans. And part of the things that Neanderthals have that absolutely make us human, being burial, cave art, clothing, and object decoration for identification, like decoration of self and what you wear. Um, all of these things, this level of conscious, these are possessed by Neanderthal and Homo naledi, which also is around when we start as a species. Though we're not possessing of those traits when we start, and Homo naledi is, and Neanderthal isn't yet. So when Neanderthal meets us, they are already aware. They don't want to marry their aunt. Who wants to marry their aunt, right? Like, so they're, and of course, marriage is not the terminology, but they don't want to have sex with their aunt who wants to have sex with their aunt, right? So we're looking at, people who are needing outside genes to survive as a species. And today there's more Neanderthal DNA on the planet than there was during the entirety of their species whole, to our knowledge. Um, when we're looking at Denisovan, we're seeing another species that, to our knowledge, was smaller. Um, we don't have a whole lot of information on them, but we do have some information on them. We also know that, like Denny here, who is half Neanderthal and half Denisovan, that Neanderthal bred with them, and that they were looking for outside genetics as well. And so when we come along, they're getting those outside genetics from us, and they're able to carry on. Um, we do see that there are other species that exist on the planet that we don't have evidence that we came in contact with. Like Naledi, we don't have evidence that we came in contact with, though Naledi uses a hash mark on the walls of their caves. And Homo sapien and Homo neanderthal used a hash mark on the wall of their caves in their early cave art. So it is possible that we had some contact, at least knew Naledi, and I would think that we did because we came into being around the same time Naledi was there, in the same space that Naledi was in. So when we are looking at the other species that we found in the fossil record, we don't have a whole lot of evidence of interconnectivity with them. Hey, Erica. When we are looking at our DNA, we see that there is, oh, wait a minute. So there is that new species that just came out that we haven't actually like named yet. It's HLD6, and HLD6 is uh, probably like it's got some Homo sapien traits, and it's got some erectus traits, and it's got like, so it's a, they're calling it currently another species, having some of the same lineages as our species. It kind of develops some of the same traits. It's the only one that we've seen that has a couple of traits that we don't see, like the flat face is in this species, which we don't see in any other species but us. So that is another species in the fossil record. We don't know yet whether we came in contact with it or not. We don't have evidence of that. We've only got one really, well, I think we have one full skeleton or one full skull, but we have bones from other of the species in the cave that we know of. Well, so they might add to those, Denny, but not Naledi. Naledi, they don't think Naledi has any DNA with us, and we haven't gotten DNA out of Naledi. We haven't been able to get any. And the current understanding of our convergence is that Naledi is not one of the species from our convergence. And because we can't get DNA out of Naledi currently, unless we can get DNA out of Naledi, they won't be able to do anything with Naledi. Denny, so Denisovan, they might add to those things, but maybe not Denny. Denny, you'll have to, she might end up on sites like Your True Ancestry or the GED Match. She might end up on those sites, but probably not on those on Ancestry or 23andMe. When we're looking at the other species that we see in our DNA, we actually see 7 other species in our DNA. We see, well, 2 of them we know of, Neanderthal and Denisovan. But we also see 3 ghost species in Africa. We see them within the Oyo population of West Africa and the Kwe population of South Africa. And then we see 1 ghost species within Indigenous Australians and 1 ghost species within Indigenous Turtle Islanders and Aboriginals. These correlate with the, or would seem to correlate with the Cerruti Mastodon site in Turtle Island and with the Moy site in Australia. So the recent article that identified the new species also stated that there might be another ghost species that we see within our DNA that they're looking at. So that would be a sixth that we see within our DNA, and then we have another ghost species that we only see in Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. So we have 7 ghost species that we seem to see within the DNA currently. So um, there are many different species that we're actually alongside of. I don't think that we probably came in contact with Denny. Our presence in the cave of Denisovan, the Denisovan cave, is later. So Denny is like 90,000 years ago, and our presence in the cave in Denisova cave, I think, is like I want to say 26,000 years ago, but it might be a little bit more. It might be a little bit later. So we're not really seeing that we would have come in contact with Denny herself, but probably her not her direct descendants, because she was 13 and no sign. I mean, we don't, and they can tell in the bone now whether or not, like, they can tell from DNA, not DNA, but like from different structural changes and chemicals that have been given off within the bone, that they could probably read in the DNA whether or not somebody has given childbirth. So um, and she was 13. You know, it was very unlikely she was giving birth. So not her direct descendants, but some descendants of her family, maybe. Absolutely, there is ghost DNA here, and there is the Cerruti Mastodon site here in Turtle Island, and there is Abya South America. So there is ghost DNA in Abya as well. And when we're looking at those, we're also seeing more recently that so we have a find that's 33,000 years ago in the southern tip of Mexico. And that would not be like a first landing because of the situation of where it's at, like on the land. Um, or, like the going in to get there, across all this forested land anyways. So we have that. So that would put probably 35,000 years ago. And then there's another DNA study that's stating that they think that the um, migration is at 52,000 years ago over to probably Abya. So there's a southern boat route that's being studied currently along the islands of the South Pacific, and that would be anything 35 or 52,000 years ago would be a southern boat route. Um, the Kelp Highway has been something that's come out a lot recently, or within the last 10 or so years. And the Kelp Highway is, they're thinking like 20,000 years ago. The Bering Land Bridge is the route of migration over, as the first route of migration over, has long been debunked. The idea that there is a migration over on the land bridge, or rather Beringia, which is kind of the continent that gets created up in that space during the Ice Age, where there's this ice-free space from 18 to 15,000 years ago that leads into Turtle Island. There is still possibility that there are later groups coming along that route. We have Denny's DNA. They're not going to put it on 23andMe or Ancestry. They're going to put it on a site like GEDmatch if they put it somewhere. Like, so when Your True Ancestry doesn't really do that old. So Your True Ancestry will connect you to archaeological sites within the last back to Chatterman, Homo sapien sites. GEDmatch will connect you. I don't know if those are all Homo sapien with GEDmatch. They might all be Homo sapien with GEDmatch too. So I don't know. I'm not sure where I would. No, I think GEDmatch has some Neanderthal on them. I think GEDmatch actually does have some Neanderthal on them. So GEDmatch might be somewhere where they would put Denny on, if they put Denny up. And what it would be is that GEDmatch goes and says to whoever has control of the DNA, or they have access to get control, get to the DNA for Denny. I don't know for certain how all of those aspects would work for a public DNA site to do it. But if they do it, it would probably be on just because they don't put things like that on My True Ancestry, or not My True Ancestry, on Ancestry.com or 23andMe. They really only put those things when you're going to the archaeological sites or to some of the other sites that dig a little bit deeper into your DNA. So that's all the other species that live with us, um, are kind of. Uh, Evolution isn't linear, and evolution isn't linear is kind of really identified in Homo naledi, uh, and is pretty well known within the scientific community and has been pretty well known within the scientific community for a long time. It's just one of those things that, the world just does different things. Sometimes people get something stuck in their head and they can't get rid of it. So we do know that there are different theories of how evolution happens, roughly five to my knowledge. One of those theories was theoretical until recently, when we ourselves proved to have speciated in that manner, which is convergence. Um, and and Homo erectus seems to have speciated in that manner as well through convergence. When we're looking at the way that we can really see within the paleoanthropological community that evolution isn't linear, we see things where things seem to be going backwards for a hot minute, or where you see species that seems to be fully bipedal, but their upper body is still like, more built for climbing, which is one of the factors within Naledi. But we do see, and I think one of the other, I know Habilis's hand, their fingers are still pretty curved. And I think that there's one of the other subspecies that I was reading, but I can't remember which one, where their fingers are still pretty curved. So more and more rotational of the shoulders. So uh, when we look at that, we're seeing evolution not being linear even within us. Homo naledi, though, really proves this one. Homo naledi is 335,000 years ago to 235,000 years ago. To put this in perspective, about 300,000 years ago, we see the start of our very first Homo sapien in Morocco, in northern Africa. When we see the start of our very first Homo sapien, our current understanding is that because of several different species living together in communities, this is a band. A band is a community based on need of many different people without a genetic link. A tribe is based on genetic lineage. You belong to your tribe because your grandmother and your great grandmother and your great grandmother. Tribe literally means based on genetic lineage. It's all it means. The idea that things that are tribal are anything is really a part of colonialism, is really a part of trying to maintain that, like, really crappy, like, down on the ground, like something is primitive, something is backwards, so that you can so that there's that push forward of Western thought as being a more positive. Tribe literally means uh, nation, community, family, lineage based, right? So the Italians were all tribes because they based it on genetic lineage. There are different groups of people across the globe who have based it on genetic lineage instead of basing it on community. A band is based on community. So many bands of early human species coming together, creating the first Homo sapien in North Africa to our current knowledge. We're seeing that this happens in several different spaces in North Africa, many different communities that are coming together, that are creating this um, different pockets of Homo sapien, like different pockets of of a new species. They're not going to recognize it as a new species. They're going to look at their kid and go, "Wow, your chin's a little different," right? So they're not recognizing it as a new species, but different pockets of Homo sapien. And those different pockets of Homo sapien, when they start to meet together and start to converge to become a singular species, doesn't really happen until about 125 to 135,000 years ago, is what they're currently saying. So Ancestry doesn't have a lot of access. Things like 23andMe don't have access to a lot of indigenous DNA unless it is somebody who is indigenous putting their DNA up online. Um, and there are a lot of indigenous communities, or a lot of people within indigenous communities that I personally know, who are very against that. So you see that and a lot of that is because of the government control and suppression that's happened with anything like that in the past, right? And so not wanting to let them have that access is problematic, or not letting the Mormons have that access because they're problematic. So you're not going to really get to, from what I've talked to friends about things like this, or talked to family members about things like this. And a lot of people I know are like, I wouldn't do it just because of that. I only did it mine because of the fact that I was trying to find my father. Um, so that, it really comes down to not having a lot of DNA, right? And because Ancestry or the Mormons really only have access to the DNA that gives them access, right? So when they're comparing you, they're only comparing you to the people that use their sites. They're not comparing you to people from other sites. They're not comparing you to, they're comparing you to the population of Sweden who uses their site. They're not comparing you to the DNA of all of Sweden, or to public, or not public records, but like state records of DNA, or, when somebody goes in and gets their full genome done or things like that. They're not comparing you to that. They're just comparing you to the current population on Ancestry from Sweden. And so that's why it shifts and it changes as well. Um, so that's why most of that stuff's not on there. Uh, and they don't have access to it because most people would think that they would do harm with it. That's why most people wouldn't get access to it. I don't belong to a nation, and I claim to belong to a nation. I have no clue on that. I don't know. I do know that yeah, I mean, I don't know. The only things that I ever really try and say with reconnecting when it comes to Turtle Island, or we're trying to find information when it comes to Turtle Island for modern day populations and things like that, is your local nation will have an office, and you can go in and you can talk to them. There's a couple of people on here who will actually get you to spaces online where you can, and I don't know if I know she changed her name recently, but No Cat Mom can direct you to people who can get you to No Cat Mom will direct you to people who can get you to websites if you're looking for it through that. Yeah, no, that makes total sense, and that happens quite frequently. You can absolutely look through there. The trolls have come back. The continents were Pangea. They broke up at roughly, the final breakup is 275 million years ago. The first mammal was around during the time of the dinosaurs at 65 million years ago, I think is when the dinosaurs died. I'm not into the dinosaurs. And then the first primates doesn't really come around until, probably 40, 50,000 or 50 million years ago. The first upright homininae, definitely not within our species or our genus or anything like that, and definitely millions of years before us, is 7 million years ago. So that's like, what was it, 269 million years between the breakup of Pangea and that. No worries, no worries. So Pangea is way, 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 way prior. Um, so Well, I know about the giants. I know a lot about the giants. The problem is we can't find the bones that were dug out here in Turtle Island or in Albayala, because of the fact that they were stowed away by early archaeologists and stolen, because early archaeologists were grave robbers, and they would like to take those things back and keep it on display, and then it ends up in somebody's basement or somebody's attic, and nobody knows where they are anymore. So when we're looking at evolution not being linear, and we look at species like Homo naledi, we're looking at a species that, again, is coming around in the time that we're just starting as a species. And as they're coming around in a time when we're just starting as a species, this coming around or they're not coming around, we're coming around, they're already there. And they are a species that seems to have several different stages of evolution present within them. Like Homo erectus, from the L spine down, they seem to have that fully bipedal, expediently bipedal lower body. That is how Homo erectus really gets across the globe. They are, still a little bit climb able in the lower limbs, but they have come a little bit more to a little bit further towards the idea of their lower body structure has moved forward towards being more expediently bipedal. When we're looking at the upper body of Homo naledi, what we're seeing is that you see Australopithecus, which is Lucy, still very present within the upper body of Australopithecus. They have the small brain capacity, and they have the small head, and they have the shoulder girdle that allows for climbing and swinging. And so, with that, we see this kind of step backwards because Homo erectus is like 2 million years ago at their start, but Australopithecine has gone by about 3 million years ago. And so, by the time you see this within Homo naledi, you see that Australopithecine has been gone for a couple of million years. So, this is a backwards step in evolution. Though, I mean, I wouldn't mind being able to climb a little bit better. We also see that there is this huge forward leap in evolution. The size of our brain is not what gives us our smarts. The shape of our brain is what gives us the smarts. And it comes about in part because of our life stages. Having 5 life stages from neonate to adult involves heavy malleability of the brain. And it also comes about in the fact that it's what we call globular and lobal. So it is a larger brain, but it seems a little bit more compact than like the Neanderthal brain, which is actually bigger than ours, but is a little bit less compact. It's more what ours was when we start. When we started 300,000 years ago, our brains are more like this. I think they're a little bit more like this right here. Okay. This being the forehead, this being the spine. Okay. When Naledi is at 330,000 years ago to 35,000 years ago to 225,000 years ago, Naledi's brain is like this. This brain shape is what our brain shape is now. And this brain shape is something that we don't see within us until about 30 to 40,000 years ago. And we start to see it at 30 to 40,000 years ago. We see this, what we consider to be this leap in understanding as well. Like this seems to be when our brain starts to get to this point. We do see, I personally can track where we see this leap in understanding coming in Neanderthals before us and then coming in us roughly around 100,000 years ago. And I personally believe that it is the actions of that we come across and that we're doing that actually starts forming and changing our brain until this shape into this shape. When we're looking at those actions, we see that Homo naledi shares those actions. At 335 to 235,000 years ago, we are not decorating anything. We're not burying our dead. We're probably only using fire because Erectus uses fire, right? So Homo naledi can carry fire through caves. They're using torches. Homo naledi is carving the walls of their caves, and Homo naledi is burying their dead. These are all actions, and Homo naledi is actually returning to this space where they bury their dead in a form of spirituality. They're also cooking meat in a different chamber from where their dead are at in another form of spirituality. So when we see Homo naledi, what we're seeing is that Homo naledi is where we were 30,000 years ago, 300,000 years before we were. And so Homo naledi shows that evolution is not linear in one body. It shows the staying the same of Homo erectus. It shows the leap backward of Homo australopithecus, or not of Homo australopithecus, of Australopithecus, and it sees the leap forward into what Homo sapien wasn't even at that time. So we see within Homo naledi that evolution is not linear. When we're looking at medicine being indigenous, we can see that medicine actually goes back way more advanced and much further than modern medicine would like you to believe. Modern medicine and modern science come about roughly 1400 is the very start of it. and it kind of pushes through a little bit as it moves forward. And it has some points that it advances and some points that it detracts. It is almost always taking from somewhere else to found its ideas and principles. Um, Very few and far between are you seeing with entirely new concepts. Sometimes you are, but very few and far between, especially in early science. Early science is really leaping back to the Greek philosophers and the Greek thought process. But science and medicine is something that is across the globe prior to 400. In 400, Christianity becomes the national religion of Rome. And when Christianity becomes the national religion of Rome, Christianity doesn't want to be questioned. Christianity doesn't want to have you play God, right? Christianity very much wants you to keep yourself, right? And when we see that Christianity is very much not wanting you to question him or play God, we see science and medicine that was there across the space that Christianity takes over through the Romans, um, and it's crushed out, it's obliterated. Before we buried our dead, so I think that we had thought process and ritual for burying our dead, or not burying, but of afterlife care prior to when we think we do. I think burial is something that is a shift of understanding, but I think that there is also this understanding before that there is permanence, personally. I think, or what we believe happened before we started burying our dead is we left them where they fell. That we didn't have an idea of object permanence with our dead, and so we left them where they fell and moved on. Um, I don't know anything about Doggerland. So when we're looking at science and medicine being indigenous, we see that science and medicine is something that is global until Roman Christianity stomps it out. And then Roman Christianity takes it to a global scale, which stomps it out on a global space. When we see that Europeans get to Turtle Island, well, actually to Abiyala through Columbus when he lands here and starts attacking, that science and medicine are things that are here. And there are kind of some of the first representations that are seen that are not able to be explained away by being bad humans. So we see that science and medicine is stamped out in the Christian world, but we see that in the non-Christian world, science and medicine continues. In Asia, science and medicine continues. We see that science and medicine absolutely continues in places that are Islamic, because Islam does not have a problem with science and medicine. We'll actually see that people will travel from Christian lands to Islamic lands to learn science and medicine at times. Yet Christianity can state that Islam is evil, that Islam is a sin. And so when you see science and medicine in Islam, it is just a further Christian proof, or under Christian indoctrination, a further proof that they are evil. Islam is, of course, not evil. Islam is actually more loving than Christianity on many levels. When we see that Christian Europe starts making it to Abiyala, and this landing on Abiyala, they see science and medicine, and they can no longer excuse science and medicine as being something that's evil or bad, because they also say that they are speaking to the children of God, that they are that los de los indios, the children of God, right? These are the children of God. They live within God's ways. They are God's children. And so you can't call their science and medicine evil. And it gives this change and shift in understanding. That is when we see that science really starts to take off, and we see with it starting to take off that it doesn't go to the indigenous people where it probably should have, because they were able to maintain it. It goes to the ancient Greeks where it probably shouldn't have, because they weren't that great at it to start with. Well, I mean, they weren't horrible at it, but when we're looking at that, we're seeing that prior to all of these advents, science and medicine are very global. We see that at 31,000 years ago, there is a successful foot amputation in Borneo. This is through DNA understood to be a 19-year-old female biologically, who they have nicknamed Skelly. Skelly, when she was uncovered, was found to be missing a foot. This happens often, but when we looked at the bone, or when they looked at the bone, they saw that this was absolutely cut. And when they're looking at this, they identified a few things. And they identified a few knowledges that had to be going on within the indigenous group here 31,000 years ago. At 31,000 years ago, they knew enough to know to use obsidian instead of flint. And this is because obsidian can be sharpened to such a fine point, sharpened to such a fine blade that it can cut between cells. It is still used in microsurgeries today. So when you look at the cut on Skelly's leg, you can see that they used obsidian on Skelly's leg. When you're looking at this, you see that there's 6 to 9 years of bone remodeling, which means that this happened when she was in her pre-teen time frame, right? When we're looking at this, we're seeing that this bone remodeling and the extended period of life after this accident indicates that they had to know enough about many factors of the body to be able to prevent infection and to be able to prevent death from shock. So, to amputate a lower limb will cause shock. It is why during the Civil War, so many people died from amputations. Those who survived generally passed out or they were given morphine or something along those lines. Uh, so, because of that, we know that they had to be using some form of pain medication, something to numb or dull the pain. There are herbs in the area, and they didn't name the herbs in the article that I read, but they probably did in the deeper article. But there are herbs in the area that are anesthetic herbs, that are herbs for kind of making you loopy enough that I can cut your limb. So we know that they had to be using some form of anesthetic. We also know that because of a foot amputation and because of no signs of infection in the bone and because they lived from 6 to 9 years that they had to be using some form of antiseptic knowledge. So there are antiseptic herbs in the area that they could have used as well. And this could have been anything from washing the tools in the hands in this antiseptic wash and the wound in this antiseptic wash to, drinking an antiseptic tea. There are several different ways that this, and all these can be combined, ways that this could have been done. They also know that there had to have been enough knowledge of the anatomy to know how to do this amputation in a healthy way, which means that they had to cauterize the blood vessels so that the person didn't bleed out. To create a stump that was livable for 6 to 9 years and no signs of infection and no signs of anything else, they had to know how to cut the skin around the bone to create a usable stump. This involves taking the bone, pulling the skin up, cutting here, releasing the skin and the flesh so that it covers the bone. They probably knew enough to actually leave some of the skin so that they can make a flap and sew over the end of this. Though this is also an ankle, right? So it could be as well that, they didn't need a whole lot of excess skin. They just left it over the bone, right? So when we're looking at this, this tells us that they had to have enough knowledge of these different things to be able to successfully perform a foot amputation. Now, I personally find this foot amputation to be aesthetically more beautiful than many of the foot amputations that we have today. Today in surgery, we do not use such fine tools. Today in surgery, you're more likely to get an infection from the hospital. So an amputation today would not, to my thought process, be as successful in the spine as this amputation. So in my knowledge, and I was a radiographer before I was an archaeologist. So my knowledge of having seen surgeries and taken video and taken films post-op and things like that, to my knowledge and what I've seen, this amputation looks to be a finer amputation. This is 31,000 years ago. The articles talked about how they believe that this must have been a high status member of the community. I debate that. I do not believe that this is a high status member of community. I believe in his time when every member of community matters because we don't have an abundance of people. Every member of community is a valued member of community, and we must have all members of community. So I think that, even if all you do is sit and tend the fire and talk to the kids, even if all you do is come up with new and creative ideas to do something, you're still a very valuable member of community. And so when we're looking at this, I don't think that this is a high value. I think this is just a member of community. I also believe from the looks of the surgery that this is something that had to have been going on for at least a generation. They had to have had this knowledge for a while to be able to perform such a beautiful surgery, to get it so good. You don't do that the first time you amputate a foot. You don't have all that knowledge the first time you cut into somebody's leg, right? So whether this person had done it on a few people over the course of his lifetime or her lifetime, which would indicate that they were a member of a large community of over hundreds of people, or whether it was a couple of generations of the understanding of amputation, I'm not positive. But we do know that it is something that was not a first time out the gate, right? Um, so when we're looking at indigenous people in medicine, this is a really good example of it. We can look at ancient Egypt and see that in ancient Egypt, they did full knee and hip replacements 5,000 years ago. They were doing plastic surgery, shaving the cheekbones and the chin bones of high ranking women 5,000 years ago. When we look at another amputation at 7,000 years ago in the Middle East, I think it's in the Middle East. Oh, I can't remember which region. I think it's down in the Fertile Crescent region. 7,000 years ago, of a farmer, maybe it was Anatolia, they had to take off his right forearm. And he was a healthy surgery. He lived for years afterwards. So we see that science and medicine, or we see that medicine is really pretty much across the globe really early on. We see as well that you can see medicine tracking across over into Turtle Island and Abya and into every space that Christianity is moving. It is well documented here in Turtle Island and in Abya. The use of herbs and the use of so a lot of times they reference it as spirituality or as a belief in spirits. Energy work with herbs and with the earth, when you believe that you're a part of a biome and when you're interconnected in that biome, and you look at the science of the fact that we're all energy, working with the energy of the body, working with the energy of the biome is medicine, right? Thank you, thank you. When you look at that, we're seeing that there's a lot of advanced medicine here. There wasn't a common cold here. There weren't diseases here. There weren't a lot of problems here on the day to day. There are things like cancer here. Cancer is a pretty global thing. There are, but not abundance of cancer, right? Like not like they were taking something or there was something nearby. And there is evidence of, many different forms, amputations. Birthing was generally done in an extremely healthy way, especially compared to the Europeans. When we're looking through all of these things, we're seeing that there is this advanced science and medicine within indigenous communities. And we see that anytime you're going into indigenous communities across the globe today, there is an advanced knowledge of science and medicine. This advanced knowledge of science and medicine doesn't necessarily mean machines. This advanced knowledge of science and medicine isn't usually about post. It's almost always about pre. It's maintaining homeostasis, maintaining the body so that you don't get to a point that you need to be healed, right? Something that Western medicine could really learn, something that Western medicine doesn't even look at today, right? And when we're looking at all of those things, we're seeing science and medicine being indigenous across the globe, and that we can trace it back prior to us. We can trace these things to Neanderthal and Homo sapien or Homo erectus. And so when we look at these and we understand that science and medicine has existed for 100,000 years at this point, and that this science and medicine that we have today is a new disconnected idea of science and medicine compared to the science and medicine that existed prior, right? We can trace science and medicine going back so far and take a look at the way that science and medicine works within spaces that did not lose science and medicine, that did not have it taken away from them. And we can use those different aspects to create a more positive space. A lot of times we're already doing this when we look at things like permaculture. Permaculture is literally taking indigenous agriculture and renaming it, right? So when we're looking at permaculture, taking, the ecological knowledge that was already here and the ecological understanding that we get from indigenous cultures, we see that that permaculture idea, which is in fact really our honorable harvest, can translate into a healthier environment than we're living in, right? So we absolutely see that the erasure of those ideas is never complete, that the understanding of those things are always there. And as we move forward and we look back, instead of deciding that we are the be all end all, right? When we can see that different groups are including indigenous peoples within them in their understanding in science and medicine, when we can see that science and medicine is starting to ask instead of answer, right? We can see that there is some movement forward into a more holistic, full bodied, full biome experience within science and medicine. Hello. Yeah, they wouldn't have needed the saw with it, road quill kill. It would have been. Actually, water quality is not an invention of Western thought. In fact, Western thought actually has had most of the period. In fact, water quality today in most spaces is pretty fucked up because of Western thoughts. That is not the gotcha that you think it is. And I'm not against modern medicine. I'm saying that modern medicine doesn't know the half of it. And maybe if it shut its mouth and learned to listen and learn a little more. Um, I'll probably get off in a few minutes here because I've been on for like 2.5 hours. Refrigeration of food and salting meat predates Western thought. Root cellars predate Western thought. So you think you have all the good ideas, but you really don't. The good ideas came from somewhere else and you stole them 9 times out of 10. Have a great one. I don't do a whole lot of Western thought. I actually didn't go to Western schools, like maybe 3 months out of the year. Um, I was really isolated and I was never really within Western communities when I was within a community. Fermentation is a key to preservation. Fermentation actually, they traced our first evidence of mead to like 20,000 years ago in South Africa in a log where honey was fermented within a log to create mead. Honey and water was fermented within a log to create mead. So it goes back really cool. Oh, yeah. I don't deal in history. I mean, I deal a little bit in history. Like I'll touch on where history like correlates with stuff. Um, and I was just talking about, what most people would consider history because of the fact that we was talking about Europeans landing in Turtle Island and Abiyala. And I was talking about how even up into written history, science and medicine really exists in non-Western communities. I don't do history. History is written, and it's less accurate than oral tradition. And it is written usually by people who don't have all the facts and have a propaganda to push on you. And so I have a tendency to go with the science and with the evidence within the earth itself instead of written by somebody trying to control your thought processes and trying to keep in control of you. Now, that doesn't mean that I haven't studied history. I studied history with an avidness for decades. It's one of the first things I studied, and I absolutely love history, and I do absolutely study history. So I do know where it correlates between the two, but I don't teach a lot of history, mainly because of the fact that most history, again, isn't very factual, isn't very accurate. No, I did not. Do you know what time frame? Said Ghana. It's hard for me to read the text on your name, so it's kind of hard for me to. Brianna, Brianna. Uh, you said in Ghana, right? I, I stopped there. Um, yeah, history is whitewash. It is. And well, like even the idea that the first things written down were in like Mesopotamia and stuff like that is whitewash. Because the first, so writing comes in several different forms. Writing is or several different methods of writing. Writing can be pictographic. Writing can be writing can depict a whole word or it can depict a syllable. Um, and writing actually has like there's hieroglyphics is not doesn't just mean Egyptian hieroglyphics. What hieroglyphics means is the type of writing of hieroglyphics. And alphabet isn't just the letters that comprise words. Alphabet literally means the number of letters and how they comprise words. So there are several alphabets, there are several hieroglyphics. Runes aren't just Nordic. Runes means the number of letters and what they comprise, right? Or the number of images and what they comprise. So hieroglyphics comprise of many different images, um, thousands of images, and they have to have other images to correlate to don't denote whether or not it's a full word or a letter, right? And then it's so the number of characters that are involved and the fact that their characters can be either a full word or a letter, a syllable, right? Is what makes hieroglyphics hieroglyphics. An alphabet is something under, and I think it's like 29, maybe it's 31 characters, but above like 15 characters, and comprises of symbols based on a syllabic. So it's a character based on a syllable. So an alphabet is about comprising a bunch of different characters to form a whole word. And rune, I don't remember if runes are both or just letters. I think that they're both, but I can't remember for sure. But I do know that they're under 15 characters. So under 15 characters, roughly, I mean, I might be off, maybe it's under 18. Under a certain number of characters and their letters, I believe it is that their characters comprise of syllables, but I can't remember if it's both syllables and full words. So these are different methods of writing. These different methods of writing have been around for a while. Like we recently realized that there is writing in Neanderthal caves. There is characters denoting numbers or quantities or specific knowledge within Neanderthal caves. There is characters denoting specific knowledge within caves of Homo sapiens at 27,000 years ago. Hieroglyphics is our first writing that we've had for a long time, and hieroglyphics predates the cuneiform by like 1,000 years. The first hieroglyphics is Scorpion, is the denotion of King Scorpion from Dynasty 00 on the rock wall of not like the cutout, not a cutout, but like the natural rock wall of a pass. And Scorpion in a cartouche is on this rock wall. And that is the first, up until we found the cave art from the Neanderthals and the 27,000-year-old cave art in the last year. That is our earliest form of writing, was in Egypt. We like to think that Western thought gave us everything, but it gives us nothing. It takes things. Sometimes it twists things. And I'm not going to say nothing. I'm sure there have been a few original thoughts. Absolutely, AOC. And absolutely. And it isn't. What color your skin isn't what the fuck is like. Are you indoctrinated? Do you believe that it's your next door neighbor that's the problem instead of the government controlling you? Do you think that everybody should think the same way you do? Do you think it's okay to be exploitable and to exploit others? Is it a Western invention? A lot of what goes into the phone that you use is not a Western invention. A lot of the technology that you have is not a Western invention. It might compile a few different different inventions from other spaces by a Western person, but it's not. Well, I mean, Hedy Lamarr is a really cool fucking individual. I guess she's probably Western, you know. But yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go because we've been on for a while. Again, I'm just having a hard time being sociable. I tend to retreat. I'm kind of a hermit in a lot of ways. I'll try and come in a little bit more. Absolutely, Zen. But I will try and come in. It's been high. Is that my Rosie? It's a new Rosie. Thank Talk Talk. Well, we were just talking about medicine predating most of it, like our current oldest amputation being in Borneo 31,000 years ago. So medicine predates a lot of our understanding of it, and medicine goes back to the Neanderthals and earlier Homo sapiens than we think of. So everybody, have a great one. Enjoy your day, and I will see you again soon. You too, have a great one. Enjoy your day, and I'll see you again soon.